Welcome to our Al-Monitor Pro webinar on the nexus of innovation, AI, and social impact in the Middle East with Rama Chakaki, COO of aiXplain, partner at Transform VC, and co-founder of VIP Fund. There's a lot to discuss with Rama. She is also a founding member of Arab Women in Computing and the Women Angel Investment Network. She also ran Baraka Ventures, investing in a portfolio of social impact and tech startups. And just this week, fellow entrepreneur and influencer Muna Abu Salman told Forbes that Rama is, and I'm quoting, the most multi-talented person I have worked with and also one of the kindest human beings. Rama, welcome to our Al-Monitor Pro webinar.
Thank you very much for hosting me. It's a pleasure.
For those who want to ask questions, please submit them now and throughout via your Q&A function in Zoom. Let's get started. Rama, you continue to be deeply engaged in the applications of artificial intelligence for business and governance, I should say. The UAE is a leader in this space. We've interviewed at Al-Monitor the AI Minister Omar Al-Lama on several occasions. Where is AI working in the region? What do you see as the successes, the frontiers, and the risks of artificial intelligence?
That's a great topic to talk about. I mean, AI is a nascent field, and we look at it today like we used to look at the web in the maybe mid to late 90s. So there's a lot of potential growth, and AI is going to be in practically everything. It'll touch our lives in a very profound way. And I think the strategy in the Middle East is great, especially in the GCC countries where they're embracing it. Many have set up AI ministries or governance organizations and are looking at how do we responsibly use AI for the benefit of our community, and then how do we also educate our communities on AI. So the example you gave with the UAE is great. They've taken an initiative to train thousands of young men and women on how to use AI in industry, but also how to create AI and build it in a way that is aligned with their needs and their goals as a country. I think a lot of the concerns around AI are in replacing the worker force, but I also think it brings a lot of opportunity, which the UAE is capitalizing on, of new job creation in the field of AI. I think the readiness level differs from one country to another. In order to build AI, you need to have volumes of data that you organize and use to train your AI models. And some countries are more advanced in doing that than others. I think today, if I was to characterize the use of AI in the GCC, we're still heavily focused on language AI. So how do we use it in translation, transcription, speech recognition for things like chatbots that are recognizing our voice commands like Alexa and others, but doing that with our languages at the heart of that. And at aiXplain, we work side by side with these government agencies, as well as the private sector. Cisco was the partner in the region and a number of others. And together, we are tackling these language challenges. For example, building automated speech recognition models that recognize different dialects in Arabic, the Saudi Najdi versus the Saudi Hijazi, and so on and so forth. And that's an initiative that's going to have its impact on education, on industry like banking and telecom, and a lot of others. So that's where things are at the moment. I'm happy to answer any questions about that if you'd like.
Sure, and we'll come back to the AI because I know you continue to do so much work there. I want to also ask you about As an investor, how do you see the challenges and opportunities in the region during a time of such volatility in global markets? You've had success over the past few years across many different sectors. How do you advise entrepreneurs in the region, and what are you looking for as an investor at this time?
So first, I think where the region is with respect to startup investments, especially in tech, it's an extremely exciting time because startups are rising, like one of the books said, in the Middle East in the field of tech, and they're doing a great job, both the entrepreneurs as well as the young angel investment and VC venture capital firms that are all established in the region in terms of supporting the entrepreneurs that are coming up with ideas in education technology, in medical technologies, in banking, and in e-commerce, to mention a few. And definitely there's an intersection with AI there as well. So I feel like one of the areas that we can improve on is the connection between East and West. So how are we, as we are growing these startups, keeping in mind of their connection to the West and maybe taking them from being in their early stage to giving them more mature capital, and then maybe having exits like the ones that we've seen with Souk.com and Rami that went public on the New York NASDAQ. So I think those are kind of thoughts of how do we bridge the gap between investors in the East and West. And at Transform VC, we work diligently on that. We're taking frequent trips back and forth. We're connecting with investors in the Middle East. We are inviting investors to Silicon Valley to nurture the connections between them and the LPs that we work with. And we also have partners in the firm like Mona Abu Sleiman, who invest with us. And so together we're able to keep an eye on what's coming out of the region that's really cool that we can invest with and in, and then also educate the investors and support them with our knowledge of Silicon Valley. Oh, I can't hear you.
I can't resist asking you about Baraka Bits, a previous investment of yours, that is focusing on positive narratives about the region. What are some of those positive narratives you're seeing today, and focus on those that inform your investment decisions?
Certainly. So, I mean, one is the exponential growth of women investors in the sector. I think this is really key because men and women look at investments very differently and choose different investments. And oftentimes there's a disproportion of investing in social impact startups. So women favor social impact startups over men. There are a lot of men who are in that, but it seems like women are more interested in that. So when I see more female investors, I'm excited about the fact that we're going to see also a rise in social impact investing, environmental impact investing. Those are really cool. Lina Alemi is one of those really incredible women who have done a lot. She's published books. She's ran a firm that focuses on social impact. And now she's started up an organization, a nonprofit organization to invest in nurturing 3 billion trees. But alongside of that, she's also creating a startup that advises investors on how to put their money in companies that are also that have the same goal of environmental support. So I think that's one example of something that's really exciting alongside the women-led investments that we're seeing.
Rama, you've made a point, you mentioned social impact, and you've made a point of giving priority to social impact in your own investment ventures in the region. How do you navigate the nexus between profit and philanthropy, and more broadly, the link in our topics here between AI or high tech and social impact investing?
That's a very important topic. I think that a lot of investors are becoming more mindful of, and hence the whole space of impact investing that's come up. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations or even regions are locked into the either or model, where we either do good or we make money. But now impact investing is saying, look, you can combine both. I set up the VIP fund with the mindset of how do we, just move the needle a little bit on philanthropy to get it become more entrepreneurial. So the VIP fund seeds technology startups that are either born out of young entrepreneurs who may be marginalized, either refugees or disadvantaged economically. And then also provides the platform to use their technologies in industry and for public good. And EdSeed is a great example of that. It's an idea that I came up with, but it was built by our beneficiaries. They earn money building it, they earn money managing it, and they went from being beneficiaries to actually benefiting a lot of other people. And kind of gaining employment. So I explore models, and I view the VIP fund as a sandbox where we can experiment with things with our beneficiaries to make sure that, well, not make sure, to give them a level playing field where they're not just taking money from us, but they're rather producing, and then that puts them at an advantage where they've learned how to build the startups, and now they can join startups easily, or they can easily go after funding because they have the experience and the expertise.
And so when you look at an opportunity, you are looking at social impact in the context of profitability and not just as giving back as a successful investor.
Both. And sometimes you look at the model and say, can it have a double or a triple bottom line? Can this company make money, have a social impact, as well as maybe have an environmental impact? And in some cases, it can't make money. So we say, okay, well, this is purely a nonprofit. But oftentimes we see that when we start talking to our tech entrepreneurs in Transform VC, we notice that they can easily transition to making an impact, and just by measuring it. So I'll give an example of that. Ample is a portfolio company, and the founder, Khalid Hosseini, is like Elon Musk, but where Elon Musk is focused only on Tesla and fueling Tesla as a single brand electric vehicle, Khalid Hassoun has created an infrastructure to give any electric car manufacturer quick fueling within 5 minutes or less. So the environment is core to his mission, and so all he does to kind of show that he's impactful is measure the impact that they have or can potentially have on the environment.
I'd like to turn to our questions, and for those of you who would still like to submit some questions, you can do so through our Q&A function on Zoom. And the first question, Rama, is how can GCC countries utilize AI in their transition to green economies? And how serious do you find the Gulf in its diversification strategies?
And that's a very broad question, and it's certainly something that not just the GCC is tackling, but developed countries like the US and others. There are entrepreneurs like Lena, who I've mentioned, who's beginning to tackle this issue and say, look, maybe a very simple way is to offset the carbon that is produced. But there are other innovative startups that are looking at using AI in water desalination or using AI in educating communities about their impact on the environment. There are great examples in the UAE with DEWA, their water and electricity authority, using AI to educate as well as to monitor the use. So on a policy level, I'm not sure I'm well positioned to answer that question, but I'm pretty sure there are a lot of policymakers in the GCC who can. But from what I've seen in examples, education and measuring our impact in order to become more informed on how we can reduce negative impact.
Rama, a question regarding education, which you just mentioned. The GCC, in particular the UAE, but other states there as well, seem to become increasingly a hub for tech startups and technology growth. How is the education system keeping pace, and what have you found in dealing with younger people in the region, young entrepreneurs, young professionals, in terms of how they are adapting to the role of technology in these economies?
So the ed tech startups that I'm finding are doing a phenomenal job are the ones that are building new education systems virtually to make them accessible for all. And whereas this is not a new trend, it started maybe a decade ago in the States, localizing it in the Arabic language or even in the Arabic dialects, and also localizing it according to the curriculum has been key. What's really exciting for me is also making it available to marginalized communities, where today young men and women in refugee camps in Jordan or Lebanon have access to the same level of education that someone in the heart of Silicon Valley may have access to. I think that's really key. Where I think governments may need to pay a little more attention is removing the barriers of getting employment after a digital education. So you have online universities, great, but is the workplace accepting your online university certificate? In a lot of countries, that's still not the case. And I think that's where policy needs to catch up with the disruption that's happening in the market.
Related question, what practical challenges did you face during using AI in your business in terms of the socio-cultural environment in the Gulf and the region?
What I understand is what are the limitations that we faced in using AI in the region. And I feel the biggest barrier is understanding AI. So there's a level of making sure that when I'm talking AI and you're talking AI, we're referencing the same thing. And so it's still, because it's a young and nascent field, it requires a lot of education. And that goes not just for individuals, but also the companies we work with, as well as the government organizations that we're dealing with. That's, I think, level one. And then the other levels are with AI, oftentimes people are concerned about security. So at aiXplain, for example, we obsess over security and making sure that the data of our customers is kept private, and the models, the AI models they build, they gain from, and their intellectual property is held.
Rama, are GCC countries open to supporting tech startups from non-GCC countries in the region? And you talked earlier about the East-West integration, where the Middle East is, of course, a historic hub between East and West. Do you see those opportunities as well? And is that happening?
It is. So, for example, the program that we ran with the Ministry of AI and Cisco was launched from the UAE, but it was open to anyone in the UAE who was both Emirati national or other nationality. So it was an inclusive program. That's one example. Another is Shira, an accelerator out of Sharjah that runs programs and invites people from around the region to join them in their startup programs. And then there are other models like Flat Six Labs that actually have presence across the region and will support the Saudi tech startups, the Jordanians, the Tunisians, and others. Your second question, I might have missed.
Between East and West, because you had mentioned earlier, so China, Asia, do you also see that type of integration taking place?
So I can't speak well about China. I know very little about their ecosystem, but I definitely see a lot of collaboration between East and West, let's say, with Transform. And there are other organizations, like, for example, Tekwadi, which is a nonprofit organization that continuously nurture this back and forth through programs that are hosted in the East and the West. And similarly, there are Silk Roads, if you will, for Pakistani led, tech startups, or India and other types of East and West corridors that are established. With Transform, one of our criteria is if you've proven that you have a good technology that has a 10x advantage over its competitor, we invite them to come and actually establish their startups in Silicon Valley and take it to the next level from there.
Fantastic. Question, tell us a little more. You had mentioned that you had been integrating refugee and marginalized populations into your work. How has that been a success in terms of your building your capacity and network? And how do you see the opportunities there? Because obviously that's a huge challenge on many levels for the region.
So it's very exciting. Given my role with the VIP Fund, we have a community of maybe 4,000 to 5,000 young displaced, refugee, and economically marginalized youth from the region. And with aiXplain, we found that a starting point is cleaning data to get it ready to be consumed by AI. So we've employed about 40 to start with, young men and women, some of them actually in refugee camps, others displaced or just economically marginalized. And they worked with us on these data projects. Now, it was very successful. They continue to both make money off these projects to support their education, their higher education, but also started to look at opportunities to grow as interns, and some even get employment in some of the companies. One example I have, just last week, a medical student who's participating in this program said it was so exciting for her because she's also learning, as she's listening to this audio that she's annotating, about a lot of things that she didn't have exposure for. So not only is she learning about AI, but she's also learning about these other things. And now she's thinking, maybe as I move forward in my medical career, I can also supplement it with education in AI, so I can see how I can apply both when I get into the marketplace.
What do you see, just a straightforward question, and we've talked a lot about AI and some of the projects. What are the projects in the region that you are the most excited about in terms of the applications of AI technology?
I think a project that we are really looking forward to is alongside an accelerator, where we have about 50 to 60 startups, and we work with all of them, each of them in their own domain in tech, but all of them doing AI plus technology in ed tech, in e-commerce and others, and just kind of seeing how they integrate our platform and our ethos of deeply democratizing AI in the region. I think that's going to be really exciting.
Another question on green technology. Is that part of your portfolio as an investor in the region? And we've talked a lot here about obviously the Gulf, which is seeking diversification, but Egypt as well is also seems to be a bit of a hub and taking its role as a COP27 host this year quite seriously. And there's a lot of activity there, which we cover at Al-Monitor. Jordan, you mentioned as well. How do you see that sector, and do you see that's a long-term growth sector for the region?
I think it's huge between the environment and water issues. We all know water is the blue gold, and there's a lot of potential growth there. I'm very excited about what's happening in Egypt because Egypt is investing heavily in their tech infrastructure, and they also have entrepreneurs who have been in Silicon Valley for 20 odd years and have now become investors themselves and are collaborating with their fellow countrymen and women. And so I think there's a lot of really cool startups coming out from there that are addressing environmental and social impact as well as technology. I can't speak to any specific one, but within our portfolio, we have several young men from Egypt that have disruptions. Not specifically in the environmental space, but for example, Ali Uradi, who's originally from Egypt, he's the founder of Tonal, valued at around over $1 billion right now, and they are bringing personal training into your home using AI and using this very lightweight personal gym. And I mean, it has an indirect impact on the environment. You're not driving to go to the gym, or that it's all coming to your house. But that's just one example of a really very creative Egyptian Canadian young man.
Another question about the culture of the region. You mentioned the success of women entrepreneurs. 15, 20 years ago, it would seem to have been a region that was dominated by male investors and business executives. Can you comment on what seems to be a pretty dramatic cultural change that's been happening over the past decade?
So I want to pause there for a second and say that, in the 70s, we had very equitable societies that supported women and men in the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and a lot of North African countries. Their women were in very senior positions in government. They were also in industry, and oftentimes they held the money and managed the money alongside their male counterparts. Now, there's been a transformation in the GCC, and I definitely commend the UAE for leading that charge. Kuwait, though, had also had that for quite some time. But what I want to emphasize is women have always been in the works. They've always been in industry, but maybe some of the legislations had to catch up in certain nations, in the GCC or other, to make that more prominent, or to allow for women to invest alone without having to have a co-investor male, counterpart. But what that has really done, because they were maybe a little bit in the background, women have, in places like Saudi, have tremendous education. They've been earning one degree after the other, and they sometimes outshine some of their male counterparts. And so once the legislation caught up, you just saw this explosion of women investors, women entrepreneurs, and they're very outspoken, they're extremely capable, and they're doing things right as far as where to invest and how to invest.
Rama, a question here. When we've spoken with Minister Omar, the UAE AI minister, he's talked about the richness of the data set in terms of the region because of the diversity of populations and how exciting that can be. How successful has the region been, in your view, in localizing data to the demographics and integrating that into business governance and investment decisions?
I think, again, we're looking at a very early stage startup. So while the data is there, and I totally agree with Mr. Omar that it's quite rich and deep. And I think as we start using the data and organizing it and annotating it to make it ready for AI, we're going to see that richness come through because it has both the history and the diversity. I don't know that we are advanced yet in that, capitalizing on the data, but the opportunity is tremendous for data companies as well as those who hold that data and use it. And I know that companies globally pay top dollar for data coming out of the Middle East.
Absolutely. Before we leave today, we've talked a lot about the UAE. I know you've worked there over the years and continue to be highly engaged. I'd like to mention to our viewers that next week on Tuesday, the 13th, we have a discussion with the UAE's about the UAE's projects of the 50, which is very forward-looking, with Minister of the Future Ohud Al-Rumi, who you probably know is a real star, and discussant Stanley Seabright, President of the U.S. UAE Business Council, and Afshin Malavi, Johns Hopkins SAIS Senior Fellow. I will probably get into some of the themes we've been talking about today. But look, Rama, we're over time. I felt we're just getting started with these fantastic topics. It's been wonderful talking with you. And thank you for joining us today on our Al-Monitor Pro webinar.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure.